You are live on YouTube.
All right. Today is Wednesday, March 31st, 2021. We will call the meeting to order at 5:34 p.m.
So the agenda we have set forth here tonight, I have an unexpected superintendent's announcement that I think is important to share. We have a guest, Principal Jana Mates from the middle school, who has something she needs to share, would like to share. And I think that given the timing of the message, I think it's important that we do that this evening. It's not typical procedure. I want to make note of that, but I do want to make sure that both you and the public have a message that is time sensitive. So Ms. Mates, if you wouldn't mind, if you'd like, I should say.
To do something to turn this on.
You're all set.
I'm on. Okay. Thank you for allowing me to speak this evening. I'm going to try not to cry. Those of you that know me, it's probably not a chance. So, I understand that Superintendent Langlius has already shared some information with you, but I felt it was important for you to hear from me directly. I realize that public resignations are probably not traditional practice, but nothing I do usually is. 8 years ago, this school committee and district took a chance on me when I was hired as the assistant principal at Longley. And I have had the privilege of working there for 3 years, then my first principal role at Farwell, and for the last 4 years as the principal at Worcester Middle School. During these 8 years, I have been honored to surround myself with an administrative team that has challenged me, supported me, and made me the leader I am today. Many I now call friends, some even best friends. I fully recognize how rare that is, and that's a big part of why I'm here tonight. My decision to leave Lewiston Public Schools at the end of this school year is a personal one. There is nothing anyone could have or should have done differently. An opportunity I was not looking for or expecting came up. If approved at the MSAD 52 school board meeting tomorrow night, I will take over as Tripp Middle School principal for next year. This is the community where I live and where my own 2 children go to school. This is a chance for me to finally have the life-work balance I have struggled with for so many years. I assure this committee and all of the staff and families of LMS, I will work hard to continue advocating for Worcester Middle School until my last day, and probably many more after that. There are so many amazing things going on over there, and with or without me, that hard work and energy needs to continue to be celebrated. Please know that I will leave this district a better leader and a better person. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, John.
I just like to add something. I know it's not traditional, but I thought I've been, my oldest kid went to the middle school probably in 2010. So I've had a couple kids go through, so I've seen the transformation of the middle school. And I know who's been there for staff, and I thought Principal Mates and her staff have done a great job on taking it to the next level. The ELMS is a great model, and I wish it was more throughout our district. It's been great, and the work they've been doing with restorative justice, I'm on a committee with there, and they've taken great strides into doing that work. And I would say, and some might get upset, I think they've taken probably the best strides of all the schools that I've seen, at least in my opinion, of doing that work. So I'm a big fan of your work. You'll sorely be missed. We need more administrators like you. So thank you and good luck to your in your next job.
Thank you.
I have reassured Jana that she's welcome to return anytime. And I also appreciate her having the courage to do this tonight and to reach out to us in advance. Not everyone does that. That took a lot. Thank you.
Be judge me if I please.
Thank you.
Agenda item number 2 is to review and consider changes to the fiscal year 2021-2022 budget, which will be formally adopted at the April 5th, 2018 school committee meeting, the 2021 school committee meeting.
Okay, gathering myself. Last week we met and we talked about, I think, some pretty clear direction from the committee, that it expressed some wants and some needs, and we talked about some very important things that the work that you all have done to this effort has brought us to a place I think that there's some real excitement around how we're going to support kids and how we're willing to do the work to support that effort and fight for it. While knowing that we're on the cusp of opening a brand new wing at the high school, which is a very exciting opportunity. We're going to support language learners, some of our most vulnerable, have plans for remediation. And so those are all very exciting things that to be proud of in the work that we do. But there are also needs, and we've examined that pretty closely. So a few slides, kind of like we've been doing, just to set the stage for the conversation. And so the goals that I carried forward in the work that we did in between last Wednesday and now was to preserve as much of, and I used the phrase, the half of the local increase needed towards sustainability. This committee has really looked at the numbers hard and been very specific about the things that we can do and how do we take a reasonable approach while not selling our kids short in the world of education. Also to use relief funds for as many items as we can without making it an impact on current staff. Planning for our most vulnerable in remediation. An effort to reduce local additional taxes that I had presented initially while trying to find that balance between what can be afforded, what can be provided, and what does that cost. But also some input to reduce the use of the fund balance so that we have some of that contingency that every school district needs as you carry forward. So we went to work with some different options for you. So I have 4 different options here for consideration, and I'm just going to read across the top and make sure that I do my best to explain each of these areas. So option 1 would be an additional local allocation of $1.735 million. The next column over says carryover use. So this is reduced by $1.5 million of the original budget that I had proposed. So you see 4.4 repeating all the way down. Originally it was proposed at 5.9. And so that's a $1.5 million reduction that we had to go find other ways to make things happen with different funding reductions, what have you. The next column over, the expenditure relief reduction. I call it expenditure because this is a way of saying, okay, as a committee, you've decided we believe in these things and we'll support these things moving forward. The superintendent must find a way to make that happen. And one of the ways to make that happen from an extended expenditure perspective is to find other ways to pay for things. And as you all know from numerous discussions, we do have relief dollars available. There's rules on those. So we had to go to work with trying to find those dollars. And then next column over, and that's for option 1, 3.2 million. Next column over, we have the mill rate increase. And I put from 1037, I wanted to make sure that I was clearly sharing that. The mill rate as it existed without increase was the 1037. But I also want to be clear that these mill rate increase calculations are in-house, and I haven't run these by Heather Hunter, but I believe they're pretty accurate. And Bobby also took a look at them, and she's really good with these things. So these may be off a little, but I think they're pretty close, or very close. So as we go column by column, so option one is an additional ask of the additional local allocation of 1.735. Again, the reduction of the carryover, which has to be found somewhere. The expenditure reduction and or use of relief funds, which I've gone through to do some work to identify ways in which we might be able to do that. And then ultimately that would equate to a 45-cent increase on the mill rate or a tax ask in whole of $10.82. Option two has a greater ask locally and again meets the request for the carryover use reduction. It would require us looking for how we accommodate $2.9 million worth of things, whether it's again a reduction and or relief funds. And that mill rate comes in at 60 cents. And that would be $10.97 for our local tax. Option three, 2.335. Again, the 4.4 expenditure reduction of 2.6. And you can see a trend here. So as we work our way down, the expenditure number that would go to relief would have to be reduced, gets smaller, and the taxes, the mill rate increases. And so working across that would be 75 cents or $11.12 for mill rate. Option four, 2.635 million additional ask locally with a reduction of 2.3 million, and that would be 90 cents or again, the school-based tax based on the mill rate of $11.27.
Just to ground in, what was the original proposal from, I think it was March 1 or March 3?
Yeah, the original proposal, I believe, was 61 cents.
Is it the 1183?
I can tell you.
Should be less than that.
Sorry, $1.46. It was 6.99%, and it was the mill rate increase of $1.46. Was what I presented to you to start March.
From 1037?
Yes.
Yes,
Thank you.
it's an add, so it would have been,
So it would have been the 1183.
Yes.
So all four of these options are lower than what was proposed initially.
correct.
Great, thank you.
And something that changed in the midst of the work that you all did was the announcement of the relief funds and how they, more details about how they could be used to fulfill some of the needs that we have. There's enough there in relief funds to, if we took one of these options that fits within our relief fund package for allowable expenses and the amount that's there with a deadline of fall of 2023. So this, if you build this out, it's a 2-year option, if you will, but it is a lease on time.
So I asked this question last week, and I don't expect a different answer, but I just want to reiterate for the committee and for the public that any of the options being considered tonight would fully fund not only everything that was included in the original budget ask, but also the items that we added through that extended process a couple weeks back that the committee felt were too important to leave to future years. Is that right?
That's correct. We have, this work was done both with the superintendent's budget as proposed and the adjustments made, also the add backs, the work that you all did when we met prior.
Great. Now my second question is, last week, Member Potvin made what I thought was a very clever suggestion, and that was to try to identify the recurring costs in our budget and put as many of those, or rather put 50% of the increase in recurring costs into this year's budget with an aim to do the same thing next year so that after the 2-year cycle of CARES or COVID funds, we wouldn't be hitting taxpayers with a considerable increase in the third year or asking for a considerable cut in the third year. I'm wondering which of these options is most in line with that estimate of moving all of the one-time expenses to COVID, as well as 50% of additional recurring?
So I think that's an excellent question. And if I may, I'd like to build up to that. But my answer to you is yes, we have given that thought and built that into this conversation. What I can't give you is a finite answer because I need to know where the committee lands so that I can make those percentage adjustments. What we have done is built a contingency setup. And once we have that framework, I'll know, for example, instructional supplies. There was an effort and conversation, I believe, to get that to be at that place. Like Member Plotman mentioned that we can't just zero those things out and have no money in 2 years. So how do we restore things that have been absent? How do we make sure our inventory is healthy? And then also make sure that that piece is there for next year. And so we did that work. So when I say these approaches to consider, I also wanted to back off a little bit and give a bit of a graphic. So I created this slide. The information is the same. And so to your point, Member Majerus Collins, option 2, I believe, does that. And I colored it in green. This is my take on this. I believe option 1 is lower than that expectation. I think it would leave us short as this budget turns over in a couple of years. Option 2, I believe, would get us there. Option 3, I think, again, if we're talking about just funding schools with everything they need, it's not even on this slide. But the work that's been done to strike that balance and get the things that this committee has been committed to, it could be done also with option 3. I colored that yellow because from a sense of caution, I feel that that's a bigger ask of our community. And with the relief funds, I think we can do some good work. Option 4, again, my perception, I think is a big ask of our community. And again, I keep going back to the relief funds. I wish I had 5 years of relief funds to slowly tear off of it, which we don't. But I think because we have those relief funds, it provides us opportunities we wouldn't have otherwise had to support the effort that you all put forth. So different things we put in relief items, instructional supplies and books to replenish and plan for the future, facilities improvements. But again, the ones that meet criteria for relief funds today, technology software used to engage and also to remediate. I know Dave has shared multiple times how technology can be used, but there's a large amount of software that we have purchased and had to maintain because of the pandemic. Technology items that are one-time purchases, but are needed to support the infrastructure. So when people can go in and get on the network, that's really nice. But there's a lot of work that happens behind the scenes and some infrastructure that we need to update now that we're looking at one-to-one situations and also pushing so many things out and communicating with parents. After school and summer school programming, I put still under review, and that might leave some of you sitting uneasy, but depending on the direction of the committee tonight, I am very interested in trying to preserve that as an item in the general fund. And depending on how this goes and how the percentages work out, we may be able to preserve some or all of summer school programming, depending on our discussion tonight and what things or what target area we're at. So for example, if we land in that green area, like I had mentioned in the prior slide, the option 2 at 60 cents, I've already itemized things that I think, again, it may hurt, but I think we can reach to if we choose other more expensive options or if we go too low. But I think if we land in that option 2, there are pieces of summer school that I can retain and work hard to keep into the general fund. Social emotion, additional staff for targeted need and interventions, which I skipped over accidentally. Social emotional learning staff that can extend resources. I'm very interested in how we use relief dollars to do that. This committee had, again, mentioned some interest in that field. I don't think we put a number on it, but I think hearing from you and others that that's an area that we want to see what kind of effort we can get into that as we return to school, especially in the fall. Staff training to support instructional models to support new learning, again, which has been an area of passion that has been clearly expressed. Other relief items, again, maintenance staff to increase capacity of work that saves the district money. And by maintenance staff, I'm looking differently than the custodian. These are the fixers. These are people that can actually go out and fix things that may save some funds for us instead of paying someone else to come in to do certain things. PPEs, we still have to plan for that. We might all be wearing a mask a year from now. I think that's a possibility. We may be back to school in a more regular way, but I still think there's going to be a need for PPEs and sanitizing and cleaning that's going to extend far beyond people's discomfort with the pandemic. I still think we'll have a need for those things, and we have to be prepared for it. ELMS, which is a model that has seen, I think, a lot of success this year. I really want to see what that model can do in a shifting out of and or non-pandemic year, so that I can bring that back to this committee. If that goes another year of having the success it had this year, I will want that in the general fund. But what I don't know this year, and these are added positions, what I don't know from this year is, will it have the same traction next year if school changes? And if it does, then we may have data to say that we can go about our business a little differently. So that was an item I was willing to put into relief funds. Upgrades at Longley to continue access, excuse me, school through resources and healthy growth, which is an effort that we've all been making with pathways and different resources. So, but in the version, I just want to make clear there's some things that are still in here that are important, I think, to the group. We left the new nurse in the budget. We're looking very hard to try to do that. Dyslexia training, again, stays locally funded. Existing staff stays locally funded. The only caveat, and I want to say this out loud, the current ELMS model uses existing staff. As proposed, this is an add. So it lands on both slides, but it's a relief potential item, I believe. But as it existed this year, it's using existing staff. This is an add, because when we get back to school full time, we need those staff in classrooms. Or if those staff choose to be ELMS again, if supported, again, that would stay relief for a year, and then we can talk about it again. Items that don't meet the criteria, and I think this is an important conversation. I know people have asked different things about LCIP or certain capital improvements. There are things that we continue to inquire about as far as how the rules work with relief funds, but there are things that they're a no. And so some of those things are things that we've asked for in LCIP, heating projects, things of that nature. You can put in a new ventilation system, but you can't repair a heating system. And so those are some of those conversations we continue to push at. But if they don't meet the criteria, they just don't. We avoided putting all the recurring costs in relief. Again, from my list, it will be then breaking them down from a percentages perspective of what can we keep and what can we then use relief funds for, and reduce the use of carryover fund balance, which I mentioned. My goal before we leave tonight is that we can agree to one of the options and have that direction. What has to happen behind the scenes is massive. And there's a really short turnaround time to have this done appropriately before Monday, when the budget is scheduled to be adopted. And by massive, I mean, I've got multiple workbooks open that have been created and connected to 20 workbooks that Bobby has open and navigates in and out of. And all of that has to come to a place of fruition. And it has to be entered so that we can hopefully have an approval here and then start talking about the warrant articles that will go to referendum and planning for our city presentation. So that's my goal before we exit tonight. So my recommendation is to look at option 2. It does the things that this committee has asked to do. It does use relief funds. It would be a 2-year cycle of the use of those funds with some adjustments next year, of course, with the committee decision. But it also has the reinstated items, as Member Majerus Collins mentioned a few minutes ago. And I believe that we can do that work with option 2. That's it for now, what I have, and I'm open to any questions you may have.
Ms. Whitlow?
So with the approval of rewarding certified professionals, ed techs, and tech people with a stipend or funds, and knowing that there might be some more groups coming to ask for more funds. I need to know before I approve anything is if something was to happen where there were funds that were allocated to other groups. Have you, I don't know how to say this, but have you budgeted for anything like that? And I don't want to I don't know how much that would be. I don't know.
I think it's a fair question. And what we've tried to do is look at this in a responsible 2-year cycle and as responsible as we can. So we're including that step up. We're including some contingency pieces because of what we don't know. So for example, a variant could hit us over the summer and we don't just need PPEs in the fall, we need to do all of this again. And so there's contingency built in to that extent with the relief dollars. As far as it relates to negotiations based things, when I do this work, once I have the direction from the committee tonight, I can certainly look into how I bring that back so that you have the information you would need, I think, as a group to hold that next conversation.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and I think when you said the 2-year thing, it kind of clicked for me, like we have allocated funds for 2 years, and if we were to go over what we needed this year, there's the fallback for next year.
It was certainly a factor in the thinking.
Mr. Putnam?
Jake, a couple clarifications, if you could. Number one, this doesn't include the debt service. Do you have what the dollar figure is on the mill rate for the debt service that the voters approved?
Yeah, so Bobby, I don't know if you want to share, we actually talked about this today, more information around that. Are you okay if I stop sharing my screen so we can see her? 1 second, Bobby.
Okay.
Go ahead, we can see you now.
So Ron, Member Potvin, the mill rate is a complex calculation that, and I'm not going to do it justice to explain it to you tonight, but as I'm going to try, as Heather does her calculation, she backs out debt service from that tax rate calculation. So it's not necessarily lumped into the mill rate. That doesn't mean, though, that the taxpayer clearly doesn't pay for that because the taxpayer does. And that's the most simplistic way that I can answer that question. If you saw the tax calculation, it's a whole page long of formulas and all of that. It'd be quite difficult to go over that this evening.
When myself. In the initial, let's go to your revenue page that you first presented. Fiscal 21-22 revenue budget, superintendent's budget of 221-2021. And you have figures there for increases. And you have the foundation, you have the local debt service, then you have the high school expansion at 1 million. You have additional local allocation at 2.2. Then we go down for a total of 6.1. So we're talking here on these screens as the fourth line of the local, additional local allocation. Now that local debt service, one way or the other, for this high school is paid for by the taxpayers. And in trying to make a decision on how high of a mill rate I want to go, that figure directly impacts my thinking. And to not have that figure, which can be even a generalized figure, of about $1 million. And I did my own calculation, so I'm figuring at roughly 30 cents on the mill, but I wanted some support with it. And this is typical math that I used in Auburn and Cambridge, so it works. So I don't understand why is the problem here. But anyways, that is important for us when we're making a decision on what mill rate we're going to deliver to the city, to understand what else the public is going to get hit with. So if I'm a taxpayer and I know that I've approved so much money, that's going to be roughly 30, 40 cents on the mill rate, and then I'm sitting here voting to add something, I need to know that I'm going to deliver to them $1 tax rate increase total with what they've already approved. So I understand what their impact is. So I guess I'm fine because I did my own math. So I'll just make my vote on the numbers that I have and go from there. I got a couple other questions. Can you go back to your slide? So when you're looking at this slide and you on the expenditure column, relief and reduction, and you have those figures there, is that the same figure that you calculated a week ago that came out to 2.8 million? With the items that you said for using relief, 2.8 million of relief?
We discussed potential use of relief of 2.8, but I would also say that with the direction from last week, I went and looked real specifically at what might be allowable, what might not be, and looked at that list of things so that we could know what that real number is.
Okay.
To dig into, but yes, that's the foundation of that thinking.
Yeah, so when I look at option one, it's 3.2 million, and you have expenditure relief reduction. Is that a suggestion that you could find another $500,000 of reduction or relief?
That would hurt. That's when we start going from how we use relief funds to reductions, which is an area that I work to avoid as much as humanly possible within the rules of the relief funds, because of I think the will of the committee to look at those add back options. And this is encompassing of the add backs and the proposed budget where we ended up.
Okay, so assuming the 2 points, so if you go the other direction, go to option 4, that's the taking out of the reoccurring COVID funds that we talked about, maybe splitting and taking out, and that would increase the additional local allocation of 2.6.
Yes, so when you look at option 4, it's essentially we're asking more of the general fund budget directly, which in turn causes more additional local allocation and more on the mill rate. The expenditure relief reduction piece, when you go down the scale, it would be more things in the general fund, whereas option 1 would be I've got to go find money that I've yet to be able to itemize, and it's going to get into things that this committee had asked to preserve.
Okay. What did you recommend, 2 or 3?
2.
2. That's 60 cent increase along with.
And again, some of that conversation shifted when we learned about relief funds and more rules of potential use.
Okay.
Is that all your questions?
Yeah.
Mr. Majorscola?
So first, if there's no objection, I would ask a question of Member Ray. I'm trying to remember what the increase that the City Council's original proposed budget was. I thought it was going to be 79 cents. But
Sounds accurate, but we check. So 79 cents city, as has been pointed out already, we are just beginning our work on this.
So, and there hasn't been any,
There have been additions to our parking lot.
in terms of items to increase or items to cut?
Items to, new programs and services, I think that's the right term.
Okay.
To add into the budget, but those, police crisis worker at 100,000, fire assistant chief at 125,000. The mayor wants to extend solid waste hours for 23,000, an educator for 20,000. A lot, there's a lot on the list.
But so sufficient to say, at the moment, the council's discussions are leaning towards a figure that would be higher than that 79 rather than lower.
Unclear, but 79 is the base, and it sounds like we may go up from there.
Okay, so personally, I don't think the school committee should ask for anything less than what the city's asking for, and frankly, I think we ought to ask for more. But the other figure, and Superintendent Lang, you may or may not have this, but the other figure that I think is really salient to this discussion is the percentage of additional recurring expenses that are included in the general fund budget at each of those option levels.
So we did increase them with the add backs. And then what I had to do was start looking at in other add back items that were, say, positional, that were not filled with someone who's currently on staff, how I tried to balance that with putting funds back toward a relief approach, because otherwise the numbers just don't balance out. Quick math, to get at 80 cents, so if you think about how I set up the slides, that mill rate overall would be, it's an 80-cent increase, it'd be $11.17, and that would be able to be met with a $2.5 million reduction.
So, but my initial question earlier about which of the options would get us to 50% of recurring, included in the general fund with the target, since this is a 2-year plan, to do the other 50% next year to allow the following year to have everything that we have as new recurring asks in the budget without additional asks at that point. You said option 2.
Yeah, option 2.
So what ballpark, what percentage of those additional recurring would be included in the general fund budget at option 3 and option 4?
Between 2 and 3 will really be more of the 50%. So I'm really trying hard with option 2 to get at that 50%. I think that I can.
Okay.
But I will say that option 3 would be more 60%, and option 4 would be 65%. It's not like 50, 75, 100. It's
right,
not
yeah.
like that.
It's small changes.
And the more I expand outward that way with relief funds, the smaller the pockets get.
Yeah.
And I guess I want to be upfront about that I'm working to get toward that.
Yeah.
That 50% of what was that 700 that Member Proctor mentioned last week.
Right.
But that's not without sacrifice of other areas.
Right. Well, in terms of sacrifice, that would mean a sacrifice in terms of a higher mill rate, right?
Well, the higher mill rate, use of carryover, or additional ask, or higher mill rates, or more use of carryover. So to reduce carryover and to get us within what I think is a reachable number, and then again, the use of the relief funds, it's that three-way balance that is.
Right, but if the committee is pretty well set on the carryover at 1.5, I believe.
Yeah.
And that's a fiscally responsible thing to do. And we're aiming for, then it's just a question of what percentage of those additional recurring asks are covered in the general fund budget, and the greater the percentage of those additional recurring asks that are covered in the general fund budget, the greater additional local ask we have on the tax. That's what it comes. That's the whole calculation, right?
In essence.
Okay.
And with the caveat of the relief funds have rules.
Right.
And they still have to be applied for and approved.
Yeah.
There's a whole cycle to it.
Jake, this is the third round of stimulus that we've done.
Well, there was 2 CRF, 3 ESERF, so really it's in some sense, the 5th round.
All right, so the previous ones that are expired now,
June 30th, but yes,
did we use all the money that was available to us?
we're pretty close. We have, so in ESERF 2, they actually changed the rules on the CRF funds to allow them to be expended until the 30th of June this year. So it's more time, but not a ton of time. But we are, Karen, I don't know if you want to provide an update.
So the first pot of money that we've referred to as CARES money all along is really what they're calling ESERF 1 now. That money, we have not used all that money, but those funds are available to us through the September of 22. The CRF 1 and CRF 2 funds, those are the funds that were extended through June 30th. And our CRF 1 funds will be used, all of them will be used by probably next month with all of our day programming that's happening. And CRF 2, we will have those spent by June 30th. The new funds we received, the ESERF 2 funds, which is what we're basing all of these calculations on, we have not applied for those, and those will be available to us through September of 2023. And then just recently, there's another round of funds that were released. We don't have a lot of information on that, but that will be a substantial chunk of money that we will have until September 2023 to spend as well. So all the money that we've received up to this point, we have budgeted and we have a plan to spend. Some of that lasts through next year. Some will be spent by June 30th of this year.
So with everything you've seen, Jake, and the dollar figures in front of you, is it safe to assume that we'll be able to spend everything that we're going to get from the stimulus in a 2-year period?
Vast majority, and the reason I say vast majority is sometimes we get a bid on something and it comes in less, so you'll have those adjustments, or these completion dates become problematic. We're trying to coordinate some things right now with interactive projectors that they're time sensitive because the only contractor that's available to do them said I can do them this week, and that's when I can do them, and we got to coordinate. Dave's actually working to coordinate 3 other contractors and his team all at the same time to get that done, again, and in use by rule before June 30th. So there's a shortage of contractors and whatnot. So I guess what I'm saying is we're doing everything we can to ensure that every dollar that we get is spent to benefit the students and the system here in Lewiston Public Schools. There may be some caveats to that, but it's not money left on the table in the sense of, well, we just didn't spend it. It's
the reason I bring that up
situational.
is the conversations I had this week, about what we talked about last week was with regards to the funding, the CARES funding, that the stimulus funding, that if there was things that you saw to spend the money on down the road in the next 2 years, and we were going to spend all that money, and there was a better place to spend that we talked about 1.4, that's reoccurring, to spend that on get that stimulus money for 1.4 or something else, and that we would, use the carryover into, each budget. So the question is, if you weren't going to spend it, I think what the point I got was
We're gonna spend it.
They looked at it as, if we're not going to spend it, why wouldn't we spend the money for 2 years and postpone what eventually is going to hit us?
Well,
It was similar to what Mr. Physick
yeah,
brought up, that we should take advantage of it. So, and I guess that's where I'm going at with that little portion of whether it's worthy to put off the,
well,
reoccurring expenses.
I do think it's a good thought process, but not everything. And the reason I say not everything is these are relief funds designed to help mitigate the pandemic so we can keep kids coming to school like they are now, and hopefully more so in person if things open up. There's a cost associated with that. So every bottle of hand sanitizer, I won't belabor you the details, but it is expensive to run school with all of these guidelines in place to keep people safe. And so we can't be forgetful of that. But I will say that I'm comfortable, and when I say expenditure relief reduction numbers, and they're on this slide, 3.2, 2.9, 2.6, and 2.3, that is relief money. And on a recurring basis, while also having to plan for the pandemic, that is direct use of those funds. Directly. And we will use it. In that model, over a 2-year cycle, with other things that will come up that I know are there, that aren't necessarily this budget conversation, but I know where things are gonna cost money, it will be spent. And not frivolously. I mean, it'll be spent to reduce the burden on taxpayers. It'll be spent to try to do some things in facilities that our city is relaying to us that right now it's hard to spend that kind of coin. It will be spent on improving some of our facilities in ways that we didn't look at before, but it's needed now because of the pandemic, but we also didn't have the money before. So I think to your conversation, that is how we're looking to use these funds. Those funds are in this conversation to reduce the burden locally. And again, it does buy some time for a couple of years. But all of the funding language we've seen stops at 23.
Yeah, I mean, they were more concerned about the fund balance, because everyone kind of gets the impact that if this thing's piling up, and we're gonna come to a zero in the next few years, and how do we recoup for, 5.9 million, so.
Good question, but I also think that part of that conversation, to add to it, is we have been deliberate this year to make sure that we get more books on the shelves, that we have materials that can be shared, and we have more work to do there in this next budget cycle, but we've done that work this year, and I believe that our carryover, because we've been able to do some smart things with the prior funding, will be substantial this year. Say that with caution, because as you know, things will happen, and maybe I shouldn't even have said that out loud, but I do think that we'll have significant carryover this year. This budget will allow us to mitigate things, I think, for at least a couple of years.
And the last thing, on this revenue, for next week, the revenue budget sheet that was initially given, can we get a full update on what those numbers are going to be? Because I use this when I'm dealing with the public, so it's helpful to have those numbers updated.
Yeah, we can do that if I would actually thank Bobby for her work and the work that she's done behind the scenes with the sheets and the workbooks. But these schedules are interactive, so if we have clear direction tonight of something that could potentially be adopted by this group on Monday, we can absolutely get you that revenue sheet in short time.
Ms. Wright.
Thank you. I appreciate the modeling that was done for the 4 different options. I think when we think globally about where we started and where we're at now, we have reduced the local burden by 86 cents. And that's huge for the times that we're in right now. I so appreciate that every option preserved that $1.5 million fund balance. I think it is absolutely foolish to ever send that down to zero, because who knows what's next to your point, Superintendent Langlis. And so I think as we consider option 2, it will be helpful to understand the impact of the debt service on that number, but I think that this base gives even, if it is, to Member Hopkins' point, 30 cents, it's still a reduction of what, 56 cents. And so I think it's appropriate to move forward with the option 2, knowing that it gives you some flexibility, but not a ton with the relief funding. I wish we could give you more runway for that, so you're not having to nickel and dime the lines, but I think that's appropriate. I will say, reflecting back on our conversation with the council, it was the 146 that was being presented as an increase to them, and folks said that's too high, this is far lower. I do also think back to a couple of the asks that were made, and have we addressed those in this budget? And I unfortunately brought their own notebook, so I don't know what those asks were, but if anyone recalls and has thoughts about how we address those moving forward, I'm interested to hear.
Are these the add backs that you're referencing, or?
Yeah, I know, SEL was talked about, not sure what else though.
Yeah, I mean, some big topic areas certainly were SEL. We talked a lot about the curriculum 5-year plan and how we make steps towards that. We've talked heavily about our language learners and making sure that we step up and make the commitment to properly resource the staff needed for that effort. We've talked about the instructional supplies. We've talked about books and periodicals. And those things were things that over the years have kind of been shaved in tight years and not supported because of other tough decisions of other bodies. And I mean, I commend this group for really being committed to making sure some of those key things that have been, again, tough decisions, but have been passed on in the past that you've made yourselves committed to. I do want to add that too, because you brought up, Member Faulkner, and also you mentioned Member Ray a little bit about just the tax rate and whatnot. So I don't have the financial calculation component fully sorted out as far as the mill rate is concerned, but we do consult with Sadie. Bobby does know this stuff really well. It may be hard to articulate from a here's how this works perspective, but when I say we're looking at if it was at 80 cents and the mill rate would be $11.17, there's no surprise coming after for debt service. That's equated in part of it. So it's part of the cost of doing school, I guess. So I'm not presenting one thing to you and then saying, and then the debt service would be this additional ask. Presenting it as, that's my understanding that would be the mill rate ask of this budget if we went with option 2 or 3.
Mr. Majersko.
Yeah, I wanted to ask specifically about the issue Member Ray raised. Councilor Pettengill was particularly passionate, and I commend him for it, in wanting to see additional investment in SEL. My understanding was that there was a proposal early on in this process to have SEL folks at every school. What is the SEL staffing level at any of these, with any of these various options?
So right now, from a what's in the budget perspective,
Yeah.
the SEL coordinators that were requested were reduced. But the commitment I can make is with relief dollars is that we can make an effort there that we otherwise would not be able to in this current proposal. And so we can look at having people do that work. We can look at resources for that work that were reduced in my original proposed budget and that phase of the work. But I can tell you that behind the scenes, Bobby and I look at either today spreadsheets, and there are things in there that were reduced at one point that I want to bring back because of conversation with the committee, and that includes those SEL staff and resources connected to it. So I didn't bring that forth to share that out with you today, but those are things that we can do with relief funds that you have vouched support for. I don't have it as a line item tonight, but I have it in my list of things that we can use relief funds for. And we've had conversations around those things.
Well, and I'm glad to hear that, because I think that this entire committee understands that long-term, we are going to need to make a serious investment in SEL at the level suggested in terms of having one at every school. And we may or may not be able to get there this year or next year, but that ought to be where we're aiming. My inclination would be to urge the committee to have a higher additional local ask in order to both give us a better financial situation next year and the following year with regards to recurring parts of this whole package. And also in order to provide the possibility that we can more aggressively move towards those SEL hires and bringing them in as full-time recurring. The reality is the SEL needs of our community are mostly non-COVID related and are going to endure long after this pandemic has passed into the pages of history books. So my inclination would be for us to be more proactive and make a more aggressive ask this year to enable the committee and the school district to be in a better place going forward.
Ms. Hawkins?
So I want to share this it's pertinent but not specific to the budget. As a lot of you know, I have a son who's 13 going on 14 who lives up in Newport School District. And he's basically flunked out this year. And we had a rather heated conversation, me and his father, last week. And that was after a conversation with my son. Because all he's heard from any adult since this all started is how far behind he's going to be and how hard it's going to be to catch up. We need to be really careful that we stick to the words remediation and to supporting our learners. Because going through this is hard enough, going through a pandemic is hard enough. When we make the mistake of letting children think that they will never catch up and that they're the only ones that are so far behind, it sets them up to give up. And that's the situation I had with my son. He was ready to be, I'm done with school. I will go and learn a trade. I will help my dad haul junk. And I'm like, kid, you're 13 years old. You have so much time. I said, and you're not the only one who's behind. This is an entire generation around the world. It's not just you. You've got all the time in the world to make this up, but you have to do the work. And then I talked to his father about what he's letting our son watch.
It's gonna do budget, I just wanna make sure we're on track.
It's about making sure that as we focus on these things like SEL and ELL, that those stay forefront in our mind. Because if it's a struggle for our kids who have no language barrier, I can't even imagine what it feels like for the kids that do have a language barrier. I'm glad that you're already thinking about ways that we can make sure that that SEL is supported. Because to some extent, Kieran is right. A lot of the social emotional struggles these kids already have nothing to do with COVID. But the reason the struggles are peaking the way they are right now, and they will be when they're back in school, is because of the stress of this whole last year and a half, 2 years, however long this lasts. If we don't focus on making sure that these kids get through this with some semblance of knowing where they are and where they can go, if we think bullying is a problem now, imagine emotionally unstable children plus bullying. I'm really afraid of where this can go if we don't focus on the things our students need. I would love to say that SEL isn't something we need to worry about. But it clearly is. We've known that before this happened. We need to make sure that remains a focus. Because these kids are not going to catch up if we don't give them the reason to believe that they can.
Jake, let me just add something. So we also receive Title IV funds, and part of those funds are, we are required to allocate some of those funds towards the social emotional learning pieces, curriculum supports, that sort of thing. So those are funds that currently support the work that Aisha's doing now, and a lot of the training that some of our schools have been able to take advantage of, in addition to the COVID funds that we've used. So I would just add that as another area that we continuously look at, those funds and how we might use those in conjunction with any other funds. So just to throw that out there, that's another place where we have funds to support some of that work.
And I think it's important to note that putting a social emotional learning coordinator at each school isn't going to fix anything on its own. Like the teachers need the professional development and the training, and the curriculum needs adjustment, and it's like a whole district-wide, everything has to change and shift and adjust. So putting the coordinators in the school will be a good first start, but that's not gonna solve the district-wide problems that we have. Mr. Bruce. Mr. Bruce.
Question to Member Ray. Currently, the mill rate for the city as right today is in the 28 range, right?
One moment, please.
The answer is yes, it's in that area. Do you want the exact number?
No, I'm just thinking that if the mill rate as established is in the 28 range, And we're saying that our local budget ask is 11.
Yeah.
The other 17 would be made up of debt service and the city side. Is that a fair assumption?
There would also be the 1 cent from county.
Oh, yeah.
It's 1 cent. We kept it low this year. You're welcome.
But, so that's where that
Yeah,
would be.
where the remainder would be.
So the school's percentage of it is still, even with these changes we're proposing, would still only make up about a third of the mill rate.
Maybe a little bit more, but between a third and a half.
Yeah, certainly closer to a third, but I mean, either way, I mean, so this is not necessarily what's driving the ongoing mill rate for the city. It's only, yes, it's an increase, it's a piece of it, but, and to Ron's point, you know, the debt service, if we look at Jake's slide, and I'm just doing some really simple, quick math. If the additional add on option 2, I think is 2.035, something like that. That was gonna add 60 cents. So if there's an additional $1 million for the expansion of the high school, that's half of that, and Ron said it was 30 cents, I think he's dead on. That's pretty simple math. If an additional add of 2 million adds 60 cents, additional million for the debt service would add another 30. I think you're absolutely right on, Ron. I would say that's, if that calculation is right, I think that's where we'd be at. And even at that, we're still under 12 cents. Or I mean, I'm sorry, under $12, right, on the mill rate.
Yeah.
Of, well, ultimately be 30. So at the most, we would be 40%.
Yeah.
And yet we have the largest budget by far of any department within the city. Fortunately, we have a lot of other revenue sources that help us. Because of course, police and fire, they don't have nearly the support that we get from the state or from the feds or from title funds and all this stuff. So we're fortunate in that respect. But we're still not asking to drive that mill rate. I mean, it's an increase, yes it is, but it's not nearly as significant as you might want to try to make it out. Because we're still not the majority of that mill rate, even with the debt service.
Ms. Wright.
And to member Damon's point, I would argue that we are, for the second year in a row, bailing the city out by using relief funds in this way. I think last year we went way down, and now we're, even just to get to normal was what, 41 cents? And then we're going past that to try to restore this department, which is one of the biggest employers in the city, perhaps definitely the county, perhaps beyond. And we are trying to make it a sustainable budget, which I think is a really key point moving forward, that we are trying to lessen the impact now so that it lessens the impact later at the same time. And like, we're serving 18 different, what's the word I'm looking for? Goodness. Priorities. You know, there's so much to consider, and I think the way we have gone through and reviewed this has led us to the only logical solution is to go with either options 2 or 3. If we want to give more leeway to the superintendent and his department, then I say we go with option 3. Option 2 feels like we're squeezing in a little bit.
And just to follow up on that, Legion, I agree with you. I think that regardless of what we do propose, the city still may ask for some reduction. So if we go with 3, we still may be able to get closer to 2 ultimately, and it's still not, to me, it's still, if we're at 75 cents and the city's at 80 cents, it seems to me only we should be able, if Jake puts his used car salesman's hat on, he should be able to sell it to the city council. I'm hoping they
I'll be there to help you.
We might have to hire that one out. I'm not.
But again, when you talk about those numbers, that's not including the 30 cents or so for the debt service for the high school,
That's true.
which will be part of our discussion, in terms of what.
There will also be an increased debt service on the city side as well. We know that.
The response to member Collins' suggestion, what we talked about last week, one thing that I can live with this that is huge is 1.5 getting recovered each year for the carryover. And we do 4.5 million in the 3-year term. That's basically gonna open things up to be able to introduce the programs, sustainable programs that we're gonna need. So, I mean, I think we're doing a lot of justice in terms of addressing a serious issue with that cliff, not having to deal with the impacts of it year after year, but rather if we're able to do this each year at that amount, I don't see needing to change any of the other figures. I think Jake's figures are reasonable, and like I said, I heard from the public that let's spend the funds that are available, and if we're taking care of the fund balance, that lightens up that any impact that will come from the loss of stimulus funds and so forth. Jake, one other thing, and besides this being update, the revenue update, if we can also get a separate sheet showing the full mill rate calculation in terms of what we're asking for the taxpayers, what the debt service is gonna be. I'm gonna need that, and people have already asked for it, so.
That information will come from the city too. So now that you're asking for that, that'll be easier to get because that's numbers that are generated on the city side, some of that.
I want to deflect that a little bit here, not deflect, but just share Bobby in that conversation. Bobby, is that a reasonable thing to ask to have turned around so that we can have that in their heads?
Yes, it is, definitely.
Mr. Andres-Collins.
So I quite agree with Member Ray and Vice Chair Damon about the virtues of being a little more cautious here, and with an eye towards perhaps giving direction to the superintendent and moving things along. I would make a motion that we adopt option 3 and instruct the superintendent to bring us back a budget that is consistent with that option for final approval on Monday.
I'll second.
Any further discussion?
Can you put your slide back up?
Yes, sir, yeah.
Mr. LeBlanc.
As someone who spent an hour and a half before this meeting trying to balance my checkbook and find $5.67, I rely on the wisdom of the members here and the experience of the people that have gone through this before. And I just want to know, what are the positives and negatives of going to level 3 rather than level 2?
I guess from my take, looking at option 3 versus option 2 is it's really about a cost and commitment from the community. The ability to have more things in the general fund so that it carries forward. The ability to still reduce the carryover, I think, is a real positive. 75 cents to be at $11.12, as you just heard other members explain percentage-wise as it relates to city, is an easy argument to make. It wouldn't be very hard for me to present that to the city. Don't know how receptive everyone will be, but I can present that with good confidence. I think as we talk about the cliff, so pandemic relief funds have afforded us an opportunity to, I think, if we're smart, avoid what might have been something really bad 2 years out. So there's a blessing and a curse in all of this. But if we use the relief funds in a smart way, we assure things in the general fund that we know we need to support our kids, and we reduce this use of carryover, we can look up in 2 years and say, okay, we're using the relief funds as we had intended. Our carryover use has been reduced. We have some money in the bank so we can sustain some efforts. I think those are some real positive things. The negative side to this is really the 75 cents on the mill rate, and will it be supported by the council and the community? If it's not, we have more work to do. If it is, it does all those things I just mentioned. And when I say all those things I just mentioned, I guess I want to reiterate, and I'm sorry if I'm beating a drum a bit. It's the opening of a brand new arts, expression, identity, learning, mastery wing at the high school. It's providing learning opportunities for our language learners who are a vast portion of some of our schools that we have underserved for a decade. Again, tough decisions, but this budget does that. It also restores things that have been shaved off because of tough decisions other people have had to make for a long time. I don't discredit them, they were tough decisions. But this puts things back that other committees have not been able to do for a long time. And it makes a commitment to teachers and students and our facilities that I've not seen happen in all my years in the district. And part of that is the effort this committee has made, and part of that is relief funds and situation. But to be smart with it, so we can look up, as Ron said, in a couple of years, and realize that we have some money in the bank, we have some very clear direction, and we've made commitments in our general fund that are sustainable. I think that that's a real good position to be in.
Thank you.
Ms. Ray.
I have a tangential question about how fund balance is stored. Do we gain any interest on that? Is there any opportunity to grow that over the year while we hang on to that?
Bobby, do you know about investing fund balance as far as how that's held with the city?
So I'm not sure what is done at the city level. I know that if you're not a municipal school district, that's not necessarily how it works. It just is, it's cash. It sits in your bank account. I'm not sure what Heather does, if any investment at all. That would be a Heather question.
So our fund balance is held by the city. I
Yes.
think I missed that at some point, so thank you. That's helpful information. Okay.
Any other discussion? Mr. Ramirez-Gomes.
I would just encourage people to support the motion. This is an opportunity to fund our schools at a robust rate, to make a responsible ask that puts us in a position to gradually transition over the course of a couple of budget cycles off of relying on the relief funds without at any point asking for a huge hit, either cuts to the budget or a massive jump in the tax rate. And I think that this committee doesn't spend a lot of time talking about the economic development opportunity that comes with better schools, but it is worth keeping in mind that the best thing that we can do to grow Lewiston and make it a better city 10 years from now is invest in our schools today. And so, you know, I would encourage folks to support this and to go to the council and say, you know, you need to vote for this. You need to pass this along to voters, give them the opportunity to really support our schools.
Ms. Ray.
Can the motion just be repeated? I didn't hear it when it came out.
Yeah, and if I may, just to try to dispel, so the motion as proposed is to move forward with option 3 with an additional local allocation of $2.335 million, a carryover use of $4.4 million, an expenditure relief or reduction of the existing proposed of $2.6 million, largely in relief funds over a 2-year cycle as intended, with a mill rate increase of 75 cents or a total school-based mill rate of $11.12.
Any other discussion on the committee? Mr. Rolla.
Again, I'm gonna run out of excuses. This is my first time pretty soon, so I'm gonna milk it as much as I can. But Jake, you feel comfortable presenting this to the council? And this passes a straight face test for everyone?
I think so.
There's one attendee. I don't know if any members of the public would like to speak before we vote.
Hi, it's Linda Scott, once again, 45 Pettingill Street. And I just want to, once again, thank you all for this tremendous amount of work. I would be absolutely happy as a community member to support option 3 and give everything that we can to our schools. Thank you very much.
we start voting with the city council rep tonight?
Can I ask one more question?
Yes.
Sorry, I'm losing my mind today. So the motion is to ask the superintendent to bring this back by article on Monday, is that right?
We bring it back for you to adopt it. Bobby, she does the heavy lift starting first thing tomorrow. Then it will go through legal. Bobby, do we bring it back by article on Monday?
Yes, you'll get it by article.
So on Monday, we would be able to provide the things that have been asked for, the revenue sheet, the articles with totals. Is there anything else the committee would like to see on Monday to adopt?
The debt service.
Oh, the mill rate calculation, yes.
Okay, thank you for indulging me.
Okay. City council,
Yes.
and then I go to myself normally, right?
Yes.
Yeah, yes. Mr. Ward 1. I'm just struggling tonight, I apologize.
Yes.
Ward 2,
Yes.
3,
Yes.
4,
Yes.
5,
Yes.
6,
Yes.
7.
Yes.
All right, motion passes 9-0. And we will get to work on option 3.
And agenda item number 3 is to adjourn. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Second.
Or city council rep?
Yes.
Yes. Ward 1. Ward 2.
Yes.
3,
Yes.
4,
Yes.
5,
Yes.
6,
Yes.
7.
Yes.
Thank you.